Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rahul Benoy, and I'm the event head and your host for today, representing ASMA. ASMA stands for Adoption of Social Media in Academia. It is the leading global community in academia, catering to all the segments of education sector, comprising of schools, preschools, higher education, government bodies, and corporate houses. ASMA in itself is a knowledge sharing platform that helps to uncover the latest insights, anticipating future trends, and provide a transformative social media framework. Today is the second day and the last day of our mega event, School Leadership in Education. I'd like to thank education recruitment partner, EduVacancy. Also, I'd like to thank engagement partner, FMA Digital, and AI partner, Oberoi Robotics. With that being said, let's move on to the first panel discussion of the day. I'd request the audiences to keep themselves engaged by dropping down their questions in the chat box for our speakers to take up. The topic of today's discussion is implementation of PYP curriculum in IB schools for ensuring quality education. Now, I'd like to warmly welcome the eminent speakers we have in here today with us, starting from Dr. Amrita Bora. She's the Director Education of GEMS India. She's a passionate learner and educator who has over 25 years of transformative work in education. She has a PhD in English literature and is a certified program leader for Cambridge Professional Development Qualifications for teachers and school leaders. Dr. Vohra has been a faculty for undergraduate and postgraduate program in women's studies, literature, feminist literacy, criticism, women and child psychology, and business communication. She also led holistic school development planning as the head of education quality program with Chicago-based global nonprofit organization, Opportunity International. She has also contributed various articles and research papers to a wide variety of professional publications. Thank you so much, Amrita ma'am, for joining us today. Next, we have Dr. Anjum Babukhan. She is the Director Education of Glendale Education, author of ABCs of Brain Compatible Learning and TEDx speaker. Dr. Anjum is an award-winning educationist, empowering trainer, and lifelong learner with an experience of over 2.5 decades of implementing best teaching methodologies. Her book, ABCs of Brain Compatible Learning, is a seminal work that is as informative as it is actionable. Through the book and educational YouTube channel, Dr. Anjum has provided tried and tested approaches that parents and educators have implemented effectively with confidence to enhance learning and development. Dr. Anjum stands as a visionary thought leader whose passion for lifelong learning propels her forward to create a world that is empowered through education. Next, we have Ms. Meetha Sharma. I'm sorry, Meetha Sharma wouldn't be joining us today due to some urgent meeting. After that, we have Mr. Harish Sanduja. He's the academic director of Birla Public School, Doha. In the past, he has held the position of Director, State Anand Ram Jaipuriya Schools and Principal Cum Director at Sai International Schools and Director of Sai International Residential Schools. Has been exposed to various boards like CBSE, ICC, ISC, and IB. Has been a teacher and a trainer and has conducted various workshops for CBSE. In his career of around 25 years, he has been instrumental in establishing various leadership courses and platforms for developing student potential and creativity. He has been exposed to the British and Australian system of education, part of the educational domain in the Indian diaspora. He has also completed a value-based education leadership course from IIM Calcutta. Welcome, Harish. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, finally, to the moderator of this August panel, Ms. Archana Gera. She is the PYP coordinator of Oberoi International School. Ms. Gera has been an international educational leader for the past 15 years. She has worked in different capacities with international schools and educators across a wide range of countries, helping them develop and implement the primary year program. Ms. Gera is also a workshop leader, consultant, and school accreditor for the International Battle, which allows her to travel and explore the world. Ms. Archana has a master's in education from Walden University, USA, and bachelor's of engineering from BTU India. Considering herself as an agent of change, she works pro bono with social impact organization in her free time. Thank you so much once again, and I welcome you all. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Over to you, Archana ma'am. You may take up the discussion forward now.
Thanks so much, Rahul, and welcome everybody. So grateful for this opportunity. School is such a context, especially when you're online. You happen to sometimes go into your silos and you end up being in isolation. You're so focused in your own context, in your own schools. So opportunities like this really allow us to speak to educators from around the country, around the world, and see how they are processing whatever is happening in the world today and what it looks like in their context. So thank you so much for talking to us today. I just want to start off with, we all know the primary years program is the program that the IB has designed for the younger students from 3 to 12-year-olds. And it was first launched in 1997. Since then, it's gained a lot of popularity, especially in India. But according to you, what do you think the PYP, what makes the PYP really special? What makes it different? What makes it unique? What do you all think?
Do we just answer randomly, or would you like one of us to address that?
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and share your thoughts.
Right now, I'm currently at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and we have a lot of, texts that we read. And if you look at what the educators and the psychologists were trying to aspire for the last, say, few decades, I think it's really kind of materialized beautifully in the PYP curriculum. The fact that children are naturally very curious, naturally, they have that wonder. They want to know about the world around them. They're curious about it. And the fact that we have in the 21st century, we have a need to build those 21st century skills of critical thinking, of creativity, of collaboration, of communication. It's a beautiful curriculum in which allows that children to unleash that creativity and know the world around them. Mm-hmm. That's what I would have to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, Anjum. Anybody else?
Yeah. Hi, so if I'll add, completely agree with Anjum here. And I think very long back, Howard Gardner said that coverage is the enemy of understanding. And what's special about the PYP program, that it quite naturally allows for that flexibility in the curriculum, where the teacher and the learner are not really worried about the idea of coverage. The approach, which is transdisciplinary, ensures that not just subject boundaries are, children go beyond them and between and across, etc., but they also are at the same time seeing their personality, their behavior, their energy, emotional energy, their the attributes, the IB attributes that we hear often spoken about, all of these as one whole. And it is how it is. It actually is. But the whole system, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, where these things are taken as separate chunks and dealt with like that, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work like this in life. And that's why it doesn't really prepare children enough for these kind of things. And especially after the pandemic, I think we've all been facing these challenges, especially children have, in multiple ways. So the PYP program really reveals and it prepares children. I mean, we're a brand of schools that has schools across the curricula. There are American, British, Indian curriculum schools and IB schools. So I see children from various curricula all over. And yes, everybody in their own way is trying to reach there, do similar things, because we all know that this change is inevitable and it's here to stay. And all of these aspects are required. At least that understanding is growing. In IB, it is designed like that the learning spaces are available for children to be able to have agency, their voice and choice, and a lot of flexibility. So I think that's the thing that makes it so special.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mr. Sanduja, you also come from a very rich CBSE, ICSE background, and you've been training teachers in the CBSE. how do you see PYP being different from CBSE or ICSE, and you see it having any advantages?
Oh yes. Thank you. I actually have been also into IB system.
Right. Okay.
I was an IBDP physics HL teacher for a very long time before I switched back to CBSE. But it was very interesting the way the IB defines the learner's profile and the way they give the freedom to the teachers and the school itself to define a curriculum though the objectives are very clearly defined by the IB, but then it does give you the freedom that you can have your own syllabi mapped up in such a manner that you are able to reach the end goals that are being prescribed. And the most interesting thing is that they're trying to tell you every time that whatever you are doing, make sure that the language gets internalized into knowledge of a child. Means, for example, showing a child any diagrammatic poster of anything, say for body parts, is showing a child that you are trying to teach something of body parts, but making sure that the child is aware that he himself is having one body and there are different parts of it, and he has to utilize that. So the internalization of the knowledge, it's as good as knowing or seeing someone riding a bicycle, and then you yourself learning to ride a bicycle and doing it at the same time. So the internalization of the knowledge happens in IB in a very good format, and especially PYP does a serious effort into that, which I think is a very good idea. So that's why I really I'm a great proponent of PYP program.
Right. Thank you so much. So we're talking about an ideal, world, and there's a lot of research to support inquiry, concept-based learning, transdisciplinary learning, what you were talking about, ma'am. And there is this context from where the teachers are coming from, their backgrounds, the kind of schooling they've gone through, the kind of resources, they've used growing up in India, especially, and maybe even overseas. I've worked in other countries, and it's not necessary that the countries in the West and they've had that sort of inquiry exposure. So how do we bridge that gap is something I always struggle with, and I'm sure our viewers might also have this question. How do we ensure that these teachers implement something that is new to them? It's a complete paradigm shift for them, right? So what sort of resources do we use? What sort of training do you see being helpful in that process? You all can help us out. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bora. Yeah.
So I think any kind of change, especially in a school system, has to begin with shared language, shared theory, shared tools. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And no school can ever be better than its teachers. No matter which curriculum you're delivering, it will not have the impact which is intended unless we have this shared theory and shared language and shared tools. So every single teacher, and not just the teacher, also every single parent and every single student and every single person around in the school who's supporting this whole system needs to feel that sense of ownership. This is mine. I'm doing it because I want to do it. And of course, IB, therefore, and it does need a paradigm shift, as you said. It is for this reason that IB places a whole lot of emphasis on professional development. And I feel it's not just IB, but any system for it to work for the right, in the right way, in a progressive manner, it does need a whole lot of professional development. But any professional development, no matter how good the resources and things that you provide, will not be effective. If it is a one-sided workshop sort of a thing, it has to be built into the system. It has to be something that every teacher feels, I am leading. Mm-hmm. Everyone feels I am being mentored and I'm also mentoring someone. So it is continuous. So it is built into the system where everyone feels a part of a community, as we call it, a professional learning community. And those communities are strengthened and strengthened, each one makes each other feel, most importantly, the leadership ensures this, of course, that everyone feels that, I can go and try and do this, and they have my back.
Mm-hmm.
I can just jump in. That's very critical. Sometimes I'll win, sometimes I'll learn, but that's fine. Unless I jump in, it won't happen. I won't move forward. That is critical for every single stakeholder in the system, and for parents to feel that their kids are in the right hands and the things are happening in the right manner. I think there's a whole lot of work that teachers also do consistently, especially when schools are changing from any curriculum to another. In India, still there is a lot of requirement of this acceptance for certain parents. So that is something you're consistently doing. If you don't believe in it, you don't have ownership of it, you won't be able to do it. So that comes when everyone is speaking the same language.
Right. Building trust, right? And making teachers feel safe. And because teachers are also inquirers in this process. Yeah, thank you.
I can share, not limited to just the IB curriculum, because we as a school at Glendale, we also have multiple curriculums, but the pedagogy, the heart of the pedagogy is the same. And in order for us to do what we want to do and how we want to educate, the teaching learning community, is so important that we keep reinvesting, retraining. And one of the quotes I often share is, he was a futurist of the 20th century, and he predicted this about the 21st century, is that the illiterate of the 21st century is not going to be one who can't read or write. It's going to be the person who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And we've seen with, the pandemic, these unprecedented times, these VUCA times, how much change, how much disruption is happening. And change is moving at an astronomical rate. It wasn't as much so like when we were younger, but things get outdated so fast, like within months, sometimes 6 months, it's like, okay, new, and you have to keep refreshing, recharging, retraining, relearning. So I think that that's just the way the world is going to be, and we need to equip not only our children with that, but of course our teachers with that. And I think another quote, a favorite quote of mine, is Einstein's maxim that knowledge is experience and everything else is just information. And if we want to teach that way, and PYP has a beautiful way in which it's experiential, it's transdisciplinary, but in order for the teachers to teach that way, we need to have them experience it. So I've had, like, for the last over 20 years, I've had something called a teacher's toolbox that I've designed. And it's a part of, like, brain-based learning, things from social, developmental psychology, it's techniques, it's, the 7 habits of highly effective people, a whole combination of things, not just particularly to the curriculum, but this is the way that we need to approach on how we keep renewing ourselves. How do we keep sharpening our saw? And the motto that we have at our school, Glendale, is basically learning every day and loving every minute. So learning is part and parcel of who we are and what we do every day. And it's not limited to students. It's actually there for teachers as well. And when we can make learning fun, when we can just have them do the nature meditation and dance and yoga and art and give them kind of like a slice of what it feels like, and we do this with our parents as well, then they're really sold on the pedagogy, they're sold on the methods. Otherwise, the Indian mentality is kind of has that thing, well, oh, it just has to be academic rigor, rote memorization, drill, kill. And we have one of the, sadly, the highest suicide rates in the country. But when we can share how you can learn experientially and how beautiful it is, how fun it is, how interesting it is, then I think, we progress as institutions to do what we want to do, because sometimes our teachers and our parents have not been exposed to this type of learning. And it's very important that they get sold on it.
True. Learning every day, loving every minute.
Yes, learning every day, loving every minute. Yeah, motto for 20 years.
Beautiful. So we were talking about parents, right? And I always wonder, there's a lot of myths about the PYP in the parent society, in the parent community, especially in India, also overseas. Myths like, like you mentioned about academic rigor, there's no rigor in the PYP. It's all play, play, play. And what is my child actually learning? Myths like, oh, there's not much focus on writing. Also myths like the PYP is for the rich kids, it's for the elite families. How are we, and I know it's changing over the years, but how are we, how are we contributing to that change? What sort of conversations are we having with people, or are we implementing some strategies to bring about that change in mindset? How parents perceive the PYP across the globe, and especially India. Any
I think for parent perception and all, what is very important is that one, the school has to be very clear about what they want to kind of give out and what is the end that they have in mind. So there has to be a good brainstorming within the school community of what they're wanting to do and what is the outcome that they're looking at. I'll give you an example that when I was in Sriram, we were planning to kind of try to take away the examination system till class 8, in fact, and we did that. So the children up to class 8 would not write an examination on pen and paper, and there was only formative assessment, and that was done somewhere 2005. And there were a lot of parents who had apprehensions about that. What about the children going into class 9 and 10? Then immediately after 2 years, they will appear in the board examination, in an ICSE examination. Now, what was important for us was to first of all tell the parent that we were trying to move away from an end term assessment to a rigorous continuous assessment, so that we are able to tweak in and check the outcome that we are trying to bring in, not at the end of examination, but immediately during the process where we are trying to teach the child. So selling out the idea and making the parent comfortable with that whole thing was a very crucial thing. So organizing more and more orientation programs for the parents so that they're clear on what you're trying to do. And then, of course, in due course, it did pay out to be very well, because most of the children who would start writing the examination only in the end term of class 8, and they would do extremely well in the boards. And in fact, till date, they have done extremely well. So I feel that it is extremely important to be clear, first of all, as a school, what we are trying to do, what is the outcome going to be, and secondly, bringing on board and trying to address all the fears that a parent may have. Because we were very clear that in 9th, the children are going to write at least, say, 6 times the examination till the, and we were hopeful that the children would learn within 2 years the process of giving out the examination, which was not a very difficult task and which actually turned out to be very good.
Right.
So that way, I think it is one of the best ways that school has to be clear and then it can implement, but take the parent on board.
Right. Take the parent on board. Right. Is there anything, Dr. Vohra or Dr. Babukhan, is there something that you've tried out and that's worked with the parents and getting them to change the way they perceive the PYP?
Yeah, so I'll just add that what Sir said, that yes, first of all, we have to believe in what we are planning to do. Any change is tough. And in India so far, I mean, at least up till now, IB is still relatively new, and therefore all these myths and apprehensions and so on, which were very much there, as Sir correctly pointed out, even when or sometimes still there, even when we are trying to change anything about the assessment process within the system. Despite the national education policy and everyone deliberating around it, I think somewhere a whole lot of schools also used to be like ivory towers. One thing good that the pandemic has done, apart from many others, is that for the first time, the classroom genuinely transcended the concepts or the idea of space and time. Every parent was right there and could see, oh, they are writing. Oh, they are igniting a whole lot of curiosity. My child is asking these questions. Really, does my child think this much. Okay. They could see all the extended learning. They could also see how things are being personalized for their child, and the kind of effort and training that has gone into the whole thing, and how the teacher is managing to do all this, not just one whole classroom approach, but different groups and lots of collaboration, and how it is helping. So a lot of that really worked well. And parents, to a great extent, some perceptions change. It was again, experience. We may keep telling them all this during orientation sessions, which all the schools, I'm sure, have been doing over years and years, and one-on-one and so on. But real acceptance comes when they genuinely saw it, they experienced it. And then, of course, when the child comes back home and you see the learning outcomes, I think that makes all the difference. So that's important. So when you're doing things right, whether it is the IB curriculum or any other curriculum for that matter, learning outcomes and what the child is genuinely learning, how the child is growing intellectually confident, able to express their thoughts, able to question and really think deeply, and how that gets scaffolded over the years. I think that is what matters, and that is what every parent eventually wants, irrespective of the curriculum.
Right. Getting them to see the evidence for themselves, right? And experience it themselves as well. So when we talk about getting parents to understand better how learning and teaching works in the PYP, I think training and conversations with parents help out. But what about them thinking that the PYP is for the rich kids? And if my child goes to a PYP school, he would be, disconnected with reality. And how do we deal with such apprehensions? Because I think those sort of thoughts they're quite complex, and we don't have, I don't think we have a formula to approach that. But is there something that you've tried to help parents believe that PYP is inclusive? It's diverse. Is there something, Dr. Babukhan, you want to?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that, I'm a student of psychology, and I'm, keep furthering my learning. So if you just take a look at the way people learn in general, right? Whatever it is that we know, how is it that we learn? Like if you look at the natural process of how we acquire a skill, a competence, a language, a method, it's a very natural process. So in education, like the way that we do in PYP, like it is kind of parallel to that natural process. So let me just give you an example of how you learn a language. A child first is only listening, right? And then they start kind of mimicking the sounds that they hear in their environment and what the adults the adults are saying. And then they might start recognizing certain things, like they might see the golden arches of a McDonald's and recognize that that's McDonald's. There's a recognition system. And the last part would be writing. But how is it that we teach children in Indian traditional schools? We first give these kids who haven't even developed their fine motor skills, have them push pencil on paper and write. So for example, I may not know Marathi or, Bengali language, right? I can write pages and pages of that language, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to pick up that language. Like that, picking up and understanding and being able to be fluent in that, I have to undergo a more natural process of how I could acquire that. So that is the way that, we need to mimic the whole entire learning process. So I think along with, educating, the children, our teacher training, professional development, we also need to keep, doing workshops for our parents as well. And then whenever we do anything, what's worked for me is that, like, if I say it as an educator, it doesn't really have as much of an impact as much as when I quote research, like, well, this is backed by Stanford, this is backed by Harvard, this is backed by, psychologists, this is backed by neuroscience. So if you can legitimize and back your practices with research, I think that's actually been helpful and gives the parents the confidence.
Right. Thank you. Modeling it as well, right? So anyone who's associated with the PYP, they know that the PYP has gone through some changes recently, right? And quite significant ones. We call them the enhancements, the PYP enhancements. And there have been some modifications, but there's also introduction of few new things. And one of them has been learner agency. And the term agency is not new. It's existed forever, but it's recently been sort of reintroduced, and there's a lot of emphasis on learner agency, student agency, teacher agency in the PYP now. If you zoom out, if you look at this whole scenario of enhancements and changes and learner agency, if you zoom out from your position, right, and you look at this change from a third perspective, what do you see is the benefit of introducing this whole concept of learner agency in the PYP? How do you see this having an impact on the world, 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line? Why is this change being introduced in the PYP? Any thoughts about that?
I think as an educator, I'm learning, and I'm first a learner. And how I'm learning, why I'm learning is thanks to learner agency. Mm-hmm. Maybe, and I very often feel that probably whatever I learned back in the day in school was way less than whatever I learned later when I developed that sense of agency. Till the time I was probably bound in a system which expected certain things and I had to just follow, and that was the approach expected. I hated learning. And it was something that I had to do. It was a necessity. Later, I think when it became something that I wanted to do, I just went on and on and on, and today also. And I think our generation, we changed jobs. A generation before us almost stayed for a lifetime in the same job, right? And that's how they retired. And this change happened. For students today, and actually even working professionals today, already this generation, they're not just changing jobs, they're changing careers. Mm-hmm. They're moving into very different domains. It's no longer even about just every information at the click of a button. Very soon, even that's going to change to every information in the chip inside your head. Mm-hmm. And you already know, but you do need to navigate the disinformation and the misinformation and so much of the clutter, and you really need to have all of that sense. And that's why all the more reason you need a whole lot of ownership and agency. And I think this is why all that stress, because there'll be 100 voices all around all the time trying to misguide and mislead. Mm-hmm. And you yet need to find your way through it. I think that is become so critical today, and it's going to be more and more so for children to come. They are smart. Every generation is smarter than the previous one, as we all know. But then, and they're coping, and they've shown tremendous tenacity, better than any adult during the pandemic. And this is one thing that is imperative. Irrespective of the curriculum, learner agency is really got to be at the heart of anything that works for learning. Mm-hmm. And learning to learn is what we're really dealing with, not really, giving them some bit of information.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think that was
I would like to add here one thing. I'm sorry. Okay, I just would like to say here, in fact, there is a shloka in Gita which talks about success. And when it talks about success, it says that there are 5 different aspects which are needed for anyone to succeed. So there has to be a performer who is going to do the act. And apart from the performer, there has to be another thing which they very categorically specify, and that is the presence of the equipment required for performance. That is the second thing that they define. And the third thing is the earnest dedication for the act that you are performing. The fourth thing is very clearly defined, is the presence of an organization where the performer can do anything. So the presence of organization or an agency is like the presence of a institution or a bigger, whatever you may call it, which I think now the PYP is trying to bring into and acknowledging that the presence of agency, if it is not formalized, then I don't think so that there can be any kind of learning in this whole process. Though you may have a learner, but a learner cannot do anything if there is no agency. So that is extremely important. I think, therefore, in due course, I felt that this was something which was already there in the system, but we have now started acknowledging it. So that's very, very good.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Sanduja.
What I would like to just say, just to add to that, I mean, both of those are very beautiful comments. But basically, like, I think learner agency, for it to become a little bit more defined, it's very welcome, because if you look at the beginning of our education, formal education system, you know, the schools and the teachers, they were repositories or dispensers of knowledge, and it's no longer that way. The last couple of decades, information is available readily everywhere. So it's not about having that information and getting that information. It's about being equipped to understand with the critical thinking skills, creativity, collaboration, you know, on what to do with that information. How do we, you know, apply it? How do we evaluate it? How do we know what is true, what is fake, you know, what is, you know, because there's a lot of inauthenticity of knowledge. So knowledge that is available is not necessarily accurate these days. So how do you navigate through that? And then how, you know, the evaluation of it, the analysis of it, the synthesis of it, how do you, you know, create something new with it? And even the way that we ask questions, because if you look at, there's a beautiful book by Warren Berger called The More Beautiful Question. And, you know, children, when they're at age 4, they were never again in their life asked as many questions as imaginatively and as inquisitively as they do when they're young. And, you know, Sir Ken Robinson has talked about, you know, how schools are killing creativity and things like that. And I feel that PYP, you know, is probably one system that doesn't kill that creativity. It keeps welcoming those questions. And when we look at all the latest inventions of, let's say, like the last 50 years, it's all started, that innovation, with a question, that somebody was curious to do something different. And that's what's led it. And then that's what we need. That's how we're going to disrupt. That's how things are going to change and progress. So learner, voice, choice, agency, knowing is not enough. What is the action that follows that knowing? This is all really, really important.
Right. So what are the challenges that come with it? That's the next question that comes to my mind when we talk about, you know, if I'm a parent, for example, and I'm hearing this conversation, right, about us wanting students to have ownership, students to have voice, students to have flexibility, and then being able to make decisions for themselves. I remember 2 or 3 years ago when this was newly introduced and we would talk about it in PYP workshops, even teachers had apprehensions, you know. They were wondering how will we create a balance? It was almost like you have to let go, right? There's a lot of letting go by teachers, by parents. Do you see that as a challenge? Has that changed? Or is there any other apprehensions that people have with this whole system of, or our approach of giving ownership to students?
Go ahead. I'll just share. I wanted to talk about the UN SDGs.
Okay. I was just wanting to share that what happens is that with the advent of social media and so many things coming up now, it becomes almost a very real fear amongst the teachers as well as the parents, that how the children will navigate through this entire information that comes to them from various sources. And of course, the ability to know what is genuine and what is not genuine. And it looks like as if everyone seems to be trying to color our minds, or everyone is trying to sell something, or everyone is trying to tell that this is right and that is not right, or this is better than that is. So what happens is that how do we give this critical skill of critical thinking where the children are able to make a correct decision based on the information that they have, and not get bogged down by the kind of information which may be trying to actually color their mind in a wrong way. So having this ability to cross-check and to critically analyze whatever is being presented and to come to those conclusions which are right is a very, very important thing, which I think is to be taught to the children. And of course, the parents would have real fears regarding this, because I definitely would like my son to learn this critical thinking skill as soon as possible, so that he or she can navigate his way into this world.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
Sure.
So just to add to what Sir's already said, and I said this navigation between, we're all living in these echo chambers. And one thing that's more than ever critical to understand for every one of us is that there is no one truth. More and more, and there is not even just a binary to anything. There are a whole host of perspectives. And I think one of the things that the IB seeks to do is to open the student to one, to of course freely express their own perspective, which could be very different from someone else's, but also to listen and very often agree with a perspective which may be very different. This is a very, very critical skill when we are bound in so many echo chambers, and yet we need to make the right kind of decisions for sustainability itself. Forget the rest, but just to survive also. So then it's important that students really learn very soon this difference, and only that will slowly develop that critical thinking that we are talking about. We call it a 21st century skill. We're already in the third decade of this. And even these 4 C's have really taken on varied dimensions. It's no longer just communication, it is also cross-cultural communication and virtual communication. It's no longer just collaboration, but also virtual collaboration and so much more. And similarly, it's no longer just creativity, but defining the problem and empathizing and really design thinking completely. So all of these really, when the child needs to adapt to as part of their persona, then it can't happen without proper learner agency.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Vora.
What I wanted
Talking about challenges, if I were
somebody who, that quickly?
Sorry, go
on.
I
just wanted to answer that question is that, I mean, I think in IB, we have that theory of knowledge, right? The epistemology of what is it that is worth knowing. And I feel that as an educator, I was really, I welcome the UN SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So while, for decades on, I mean, we have been learning about the world around us, but now when they were introduced, we kind of had like this entire, like till 2030, these are the Sustainable Development Goals, whether it's gender equality, whether it's, zero hunger, peaceful institutions, life on the planet, on land and water. So I feel that this is giving more of an input for children, especially in a PYP curriculum, to use their voice, choice, and agency, to not only learn about the world around them, but to know how to make it a more sustainable and humane place, not in the future, but today itself. So I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Babukhan, because I think if you're talking about children contributing to a better world now and in the future, they won't be able to do it if they don't have the agency, the ownership, and if we don't enable them to create that change, right? If we don't empower them with the skills that they need to create this sort of change. So thank you so much for that. Going back to the challenges, right? So if I were somebody who wants to start a PYP school, or is considering perhaps putting my child into a PYP school, so what are some of the challenges, in terms of implementing the PYP? What are some of the challenges that, as an administrator, you face on a day-to-day basis, and how do you overcome those challenges?
Well, absolutely honestly, cost does remain a challenge.
Right.
And it is expensive, and therefore cost also eventually will translate into a fee point, which is at a higher level, which again is a challenge. So yes, it is about making parents see the reason, the rationale, and it given the fact that the cost goes up, that rationale has to be all the more strong and focused. And I think that creates a huge challenge, and every school that goes ahead with it deals with it. One of the things that we ended up doing in some of the schools is that for the initial year during the transition, maybe keep a few textbooks, maybe allow them to feel that, oh, everything is not suddenly changing, and slowly wean it off. So maybe sometimes it needs a step or two in the wake of things, and as parents see things, oh, this is working, oh yes, it's possible without it. Because a lot of times a non-textbook approach itself is quite a challenge. And that's the immediate thing that a parent ends up looking at. So yes, that helps. And of course, I think the biggest thing that helps is learning. When the child goes home and talks about things confidently, learning is very evident, and the parent starts feeling that the decision was right. So whatever doubts they still have after all the counseling and orientation and everything that you do and all the rationale and everything, when they see their child, evidence is everything eventually. And you have to maintain a whole lot of data. And as my fellow colleague earlier put it, legitimize it with a whole lot of research. That helps.
Right. So it's financial sustainability for the school, which is linked to budgeting, which is linked to admissions, which is linked to effective teaching and learning. It all connects, right? Yeah, because IB programs are quite expensive to implement. That's true.
Yeah, and in India, of course, there are administrative issues also. You may have a legal system which you may have to find your own way through, because that the state system also needs to be you need to juggle your way through it. Apart from that, I really would like to re-stress on the point which Dr. Amrita said, that when a child goes back home, if there is something nice to possibly discuss on a dinner table, or something that a child talks to the parent that this is what I want you to be talking about or learn about, or ask the same question which was asked by the teacher in the class. So a discussion point at home front with the family makes a lot of difference, which actually tells the parent that the baton seems to have started passing on. So the knowledge seems to have started getting transferred. So this is a very important measure. So any school which is trying to do anything in new terms of maybe starting a PYP, then make sure that these critical issues are taken care of, and child discusses some of these very important aspects at home. So that will help the parent to build confidence.
Thank you, Mr. Sanduja. Any advice you would give to parents thinking of putting their child in a PYP school? What would you say to a parent who's about to put their child in a PYP school?
I think I would say that there are 5 major aspects or in fact, there are 6 or 7 major aspects which I would like a parent to target at. That my child should be a good communicator, should have this ability of learning to learn, one of the most important thing. The third would be that he should be able to critically think and understand numbers, graphs, and come to certain conclusions. This is the third thing. The fourth one, I would like them that the child should be able to be a global citizen, so that he looks at the world as a small village. The fifth one would be that the child must have the ability to be ethical and should be sound in his value system, and should understand that he comes from a particular culture and do not look at it in a degraded manner or something. And of course, lastly, the SDG goals that the UN has actually now put up into place. Those are very, very essential. So I think if we are able to tell the parent all these things, I think parent would understand what we are trying to do makes sense, because that is very realistic. Those are the skills which are actually used in life in their workspaces.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Sanduja. Any last thoughts? I think, looking at all the developments that have taken place in the recent years, say a century or so, in the field of education, I really believe that the PYP has been really path-breaking, and it's a wonderful that happened to humankind. And I was not meant to be an educator, but I happened to be an educator because of the PYP, because of the IB. And I'm really grateful for the sort of platform it's provided us with, the sort of futures it's promised for our children. Any last thoughts from the three panelists that we have today before we wrap up this discussion?
I think apart from all the things that my fellow panelists have already said, which I completely agree with, there is also a whole lot of reflection that PYP encourages. In fact, MYP also does, and subsequently DP also does. Reflective practice is important in any walk of life. And it's not just global or internationally minded citizens that it is trying to create, but also at the same time, citizens who also appreciate the local culture and values. So that is critical, that balance is critical. And a lot of this comes with reflection. That itself is a life skill that's very important to have and should have. So I think that is a piece, and any learning happens when we think hard. Essentially, what it's trying to do is make children think hard. And
right.
on it. So
yeah. Thank you, Dr. Bora.
I just wanted to share something that I've learned recently at Harvard, and that's the universal design for learning. And I felt that, we are a school that follows multiple intelligence and 21st century skills, things like that. But I felt that when I learned about UDL, I felt that that was the overarching umbrella under which any curriculum, we need to follow so that no learner is left behind. So basically, it's about removing any barriers to learning. And it's not just for, children with special needs or, attention deficit. And it's for all learners. Like, it's addressing, the digital divide. It's addressing all types of barriers that come about in learning. I feel that that's really a great thing. And I think PYP would probably have the most opportunity to exercise, UDL. And basically, there's three things to it. It's basically providing three parallels of multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. So when we can integrate this into our curriculum, I think we're going to be in a good space.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Babukhan. Mr. Sanduja, any last comments from your end?
I think some of the fundamental principles of design thinking, which IB actually tries to propagate, they are extremely important, and they should be shared with further schools and parents. Apart from that, I think everything has been covered, so no point repeating. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I had a great time talking to the three of you. Thank you so much for your time. And I was just trying to sort of ask questions that I often think about as a PYP educator. So I hope you had a great time talking to us as well. So
you have been an amazing moderator.
Thank you.
Lots of questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Archana ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. Over to you, Rahul.
Yes, that was such an insightful and informative deliberation, I must say. And I'd like to thank all the eminent speakers for all their time and support. Anjum ma'am, Amrita ma'am, Harish sir, and Archana ma'am, you did a fabulous job moderating the whole session, I must say. It
I
was
agree.
such an absolute
Thank
pleasure
you.
hosting you all. And thank
I
you
see
so
a
much once
familiar
again.
face. Hi, Dr. Fisher. He used to be my head of school.
Okay.
So thank you so much once again, and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So I'd request the backend team to play a short video before moving on to the next panel. Thank you so much, team. Now let's jump on to the second panel discussion of the day. The topic of discussion is how IB schools are empowering teachers in becoming the torchbearers of knowledge impartment. And I'd like to warmly welcome the eminent speakers we have in here today with us, starting with Dr. Joffrey Fisher. He's the head of school of BD Somani International School. He has held many other positions globally in the past, including the position of principal of Kodaikanal International School and head of academy at the Aga Khan Academy, Hyderabad. His other directorship were in Argentina, Australia, Netherlands, and Belgium. He has benefited by being exposed to a multitude of countries and cultures. Dr. Geoffrey was born in Africa with British parents and spent most of his childhood and education in Australia. His teaching specialization is in the sciences with a focus on chemistry. Dr. Joffrey has also experience in teaching theory of knowledge in the IB diploma. His doctorate was in education and his research interest is in school effectiveness and school improvement. Thank you so much, Dr. Joffrey, for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Nigel Gardner. He's the founder at Four Corners Education Consultancy and the Chief Academic Officer SN Now. With extensive experience of leadership within international education as diploma program coordinator, head of program, and founding principal, Nigel has developed a deep understanding of school authorization, program review, curriculum development, and school-wide change. Mr. Nigel was also the founding principal of GPA's Brooks Kochi, IB coordinator at International School of Vietnam, IB program coordinator at Bladens International School of Malmo, etc. Mr. Nigel is passionate about the implementation of technology in supporting and enhancing the curriculum through the development of novel approaches. Mr. Nigel is also actively involved in supporting the IB community in various roles. Thank you so much, Mr. Nigel, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Sarvesh Naidu. Mr. Sarvesh is the Executive Vice President of Prince Group of Institutions. He has a teaching and administrative career spanning more than 42 years. He holds international experience in varied types of schools and 4 different curricula: IB, ISC, CBSE, and British. Dr. Naidu has a doctorate in education, a master's degree in English literature, as well as a bachelor's of education degree and licentiate diploma in teaching of English as a second language from Trinity College, London. His experience with established as well as new schools, boarding schools, and day schools has helped him to discern closely the constantly evolving needs of schools and varied demands of different curricula. Dr. Naidu has conducted official school authorization visit on behalf of the International Baccalaureate Organization in India and overseas, and has helped many new schools to implement the IB diploma program. He has been an international examiner in English with the IBO for over 34 years. Now, thank you so much, Sarvesh sir, for joining us today. And now finally, to the moderator of this August panel. This is Ms. Pragati Sharma, Head of Operation at Edmonger Consulting. She's an academic consultant, trainer, and strategist for schools. After a good exposure to the corporate world, Ms. Sharma wanted to give back to society, and what can be best than connecting to education. She started her journey of teaching from international school and gradually worked in different schools at different positions, including leadership positions and consulting in various states with different vision of education. Now she can proudly say she understands what works and what doesn't work for students. With the vision of helping school stakeholders, Ms. Sharma founded Edmonger Consulting India. Thank you so much, Ms. Pragati, for joining us today. And once again, I welcome you all. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Over to you, Ms. Pragati, leaving the screen to you. You may take up the discussion forward now.
A very good afternoon to everyone, and thank you, Rahul, for such a warm welcome. I welcome you all on this panel of today's discussion about IB schools and a lot of other things which we can discuss, and how IB schools are the torchbearers. So starting the discussion, my first question is, we all know how pandemic has hit us and how the schools suddenly have to go online from an offline system. So what were those special steps from the leaders like you who have which were taken during the pandemic so that the proper impartment of the knowledge can be done? I will go to Mr. Nigel first.
I'm probably going to give a very, very different answer. I was in India at the very, very start of the pandemic. We just authorized a brand new globally connected international school in Kerala 2 days before India went into lockdown. Since then, most of the work I've been doing has been working with schools around the world and actually bridging the gap that the pandemic has caused. Can I honestly say that we've done a really, really good job? No, I can't. Yeah, what I can say is that the pandemic took everybody by surprise, and we've developed and learned as we've gone along. The one thing that definitely jumps out is that schools really were not prepared, that we've spent a lot of money over the years in the belief that we've been putting technology and digital assets into place that are going to be revolutionary and game-changing. And the reality of a lot of what we've done is just spend money. So the things that really seem to work, and actually from working with schools and spending a long time thinking, we're actually going back to a lot of basics. Yeah, technology itself made no difference. What made the big difference was being able to reach out and engage with students. And those schools that could manage to do that and create the systems to do that, students have done very, very well throughout it. The schools that struggled to capture with their students, the schools where there was a digital divide in terms of access to things like Zoom, access to Google Meet, those are the schools that have really struggled, whether they were inside the IB continuum, an IB single program school, or a school offering any other form of curriculum. And I think that's been the big difference. So can I truthfully say that being part of the IB made a difference? No, it didn't. What made a difference was the work of individual schools, from the viewpoint of sitting there looking at different schools and working with different schools. One of the best examples of actually a school that I'm working with in terms of engagement, all the teacher did for, actually the school's only just gone back, the same as India. They've been basically online for 20 months. One of the most effective teachers in terms of feedback from students actually just sat there with a whiteboard behind them and taught a lesson and chatted with the students, shared things in the same way as they would in the classroom. They didn't try and create an all bells singing, whistling, dancing pantomime. Yeah, they went back to the very basics of teaching, when teaching is about communication and it's about discussion and it's about sharing practice. Now, that's much easier to do when you're teaching in the diploma than it is when you're teaching in the MYP. But inside the MYP, teachers have done some amazing things throughout the pandemic. I've worked with a teacher who actually spent their time putting together small little bags to get taxis to deliver to their students of resources they were going to use that week, in terms of small amounts of plasticine, small amounts of paints and pencils, just making sure that students in primary had the equipment. So I think in terms of what we've done to streamline, what we've done to do things, it's down really to the intuitiveness, the creativity of individual educators and individual schools, rather than something that's special about being part of the IB. Now, will we learn from this? I really hope we do. I really hope that we take on board a lot of the changes that need. And yeah, I really believe in the technology, and digital technology can change the way that we educate, but we've got to think about it. Yeah, so many schools have invested in replacing paper books with electronic books.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's a big difference. Doing something different in the future is going to make the big game changer.
So true, Mr. Nigel. The way you have said and accepted that there was a lot of creativity in implementing the system online and how the teachers and students have taken it. But now I would just like to go to Dr. Sarvesh also. What's his viewpoint about this?
Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone, and delighted to be connected. What I would like to do is just give me a gist again of the question, because I missed that as I was signing in.
All right, not a problem. So we are just discussing about what are the special steps IB schools have taken during the pandemic for impartment of the knowledge.
Yes, thank you. I actually, it's an interesting question, because it's not so much of what steps schools have taken as to what steps they've fallen into because of the pandemic. Even the most prepared schools were not really prepared for what happened.
I would just say that how you have, as a leader, how you have ensured that the system goes smooth.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I want to share is that, even the best of the IB schools were largely focusing on pedagogy in the years before the pandemic. By that, I mean that the teacher was the central point, and everything hovered around what the teacher instructed. The textbook or the curriculum was the central point, and everything went through that. Even in the best of IB schools, there was more of trying to finish the syllabus, whether it was MYP, whether it was DP, and even at the PYP level. So first, this awareness had to be created amongst the teachers, that the moment the students have started accessing through technology, the information base, and connecting with the world, which was and was not happening in many schools, because technology was still considered as in the IT lab and very rarely to be used, and only used by the senior classes, the DP classes, and so on. But suddenly all that opened out very rapidly. Students took to that pretty well. It was actually the teaching and the educational fraternity which had challenges in accepting that. So the idea was to move from pedagogy to what I would like to call as heutagogy, which is basically what the IB is using as helping the learner to learn how to learn, which means the whole shift went from teaching to learning. And the teachers had to be made aware of that. Lots of workshops and in-house sessions had to be conducted to make them realize that even while they're talking online, students have access to information which they were probably not permitted to do in the classroom. Now they can quickly do it. They might be on the screen of the laptop, but on their mobile phone, they can quickly tap onto the phone and access information. So the teacher, who was really the source of information, no longer was the central point of information, because the information was floating there on the World Wide Web. And so teachers had to learn to focus on the individual, respect the learner more, and start focusing on connecting with the immediate. Everything in the curriculum had to make sense with the immediate, because everyone is accessing that. And students, within 6 months or 8 months, started asking, why are we studying this? Why is it relevant? Why do we have to study this? What impact will it have in the future? That became even more exaggerated by the time the first set of assessments happened, and everything was based on internal assessment and various things, so that the margin of the haves and have-nots, the achievers and the non-achievers, narrowed down considerably. And so the value of achievement from the marks or the grades got diminished to a certain extent as people stopped thinking that this was the most important thing in their lives. And they started asking questions as to what will matter. If the masses are getting 95%, if the masses are getting 40 points and above in the IB, and so on and so forth, or at least 36 and above, then how am I going to be selected? What is going to matter? And that is why the individual aspect of working on their strengths came out more and more. And so the focus on the learner shifted considerably. I think it's still work in progress. The first 6 months, 8 months were more difficult for the teachers the students took off faster, in my opinion. And the teachers have only just started catching up as connectivity, moving from the mobile phone to the laptop, better speed, access, learning how to handle a screen with whether there are 24 kids on it or 35 kids on it or 14 kids on it, and trying to manage them and holding their attention. So I think one of the things that has happened, to conclude in this part of your question, is that the teachers have realized that just delivering is not going to be enough. It's the effectiveness and the connection, as I think already been said. How are you connecting with your learners? How are you holding their attention? Each student, not suddenly the whole thing has shifted from getting people to write and just listen to observe, to express themselves. And the only way you could remain connected with them was to get them to speak, which was not the predominant scenario in the classroom. And now I think the teachers have accepted the fact that rotating around and asking people to speak and express their opinion, and that everyone has an opinion, right or wrong is secondary. What is important is to first get an idea and then see how it connects with what you're teaching. So these are some of the shifts, and great awareness has been created with the teachers. It's still work in progress, but I think there is no going back to the old system of how things were being taught 2 years ago.
So I believe IB schools do have advanced approaches and everything, but pandemic again was not very easy for IB schools as well. So that teachers, before pandemic, we used to call teachers as facilitators, but now I should not call them just facilitators. I should start calling, or rather the educators fraternity should start calling them as learning curators, because they have to make something, because after pandemic, we have trained our children. As you said, it's still work in progress. We have trained our children to take ownership of their learning. They have learned how to do self-learning through a mobile,
Yes.
Google or things. And so there is, yes, initially technology was a center, but now technology along with so many creativity actions and things have to go hand in hand, and then only,
Yeah,
I guess.
absolutely. If I could just add one sentence, what has also happened is the quantum you can cover in a 40-minute class or a 1-hour class in a classroom is probably more than you can cover online for various obvious reasons. And so the flipped classroom concept has taken off, because it is more of getting people to do things behind the screen and in their spare time, and then sharing a lot of their learning in a scenario like this, rather than trying to part with information for the first time. Now you have to rely more and more on the learners, even in the younger age groups. They are pretty good and savvy at researching for themselves. And that acceptance has come not to be reversed ever again.
Absolutely, absolutely. So teachers have to make sure that the students have to take the ownership of their learning, and there are a lot of other changes. And flipped classroom, yes, we were talking about it from, I think, from more than a decade, but now people have understood the importance of what is flipped classroom and why it is more important. And
Yes.
as you very well said, marks were no more important. It was more about how we take studies, how we are getting education. So the same question I'll go to Dr. Joffrey Fisher also. Sir, what is your point on this?
Well, we took I accept what all of the three of you have said, but we took a slightly different approach, because we had anyway been heavily engaged in what assists students in learning. That had been our discussion prior to the pandemic. So aspects like reflection, engagement, differentiation, fun, being active, being passive, individualizing the learning, what is assessment that aids learning as opposed to just assessment for assessment's sake, real life relevance, challenging inclusion of technology, but not for the sake of the technology, but for the sake of the learning. So we were involved in that discussion. Some of those things are actively supported by the IB anyway. So the challenge is part of an IB learning. I think engagement, inquiry-based learning, the variety of assessments, the approach to the curriculum, the real-life nature of much of the curriculum, assists making the IB relevant, whether it's pre-pandemic or during the pandemic or post-pandemic. We found that we needed to continue to focus on those learning areas that we, you know, the needs of the learner didn't change, but we had to change the understanding of skills of how we might facilitate that through our faculty. So we spent quite a lot of time training them and talking with them about assessment for learning that can be moderated in an online forum. So project-based learning, problem-based learning, problem-based assessments for that matter, became part of it. We used quite a lot of technology, particularly useful softwares like science software, where you could continue to have a practical aspect to science, even though it was moderated through technology. You know, that these were virtual experiments and things like that, but that was really important, particularly to our diploma students and the people towards the end of the MYP. We used technology, I think, really effectively also in terms of group work, through our design work, through our drama. You know, that we had some very creative teachers who were able to, using shared software and stuff, be able to develop real dramatic experiences, even though they were being done at a distance and in group things. So our big focus was, how do we continue to foster a really rich learning environment, although we are fixed, if you like, in this technological world. The joy, of course, of coming back into face-to-face teaching, or hybrid, which is what we're in at the moment, has been that we're able to take some of those some of those richer experiences that we've developed online and bring them face-to-face, where they are richer still. So we were lucky. Our particular student clientele all had devices, all had good connectivity. So the technological divide, which Nigel was talking about, didn't affect our particular students. And so the transition from being face-to-face to online, we managed reasonably smoothly, but the big thing for our faculty was engaging in what it meant to foster learning in a new environment.
Thank you, Dr. Joffrey. I guess what you're saying is very valid. I mean, we actually tried all the technical aspects, like how we exactly can, if not replicate, then at least make the classroom as engaging as it was in offline. And I know there's so many virtual labs, there's so many other virtual arrangements which were done during this pandemic by so many schools, and I'm sure Somani International School must be the same. Now I'll just move to the second part of, second question of today's session is, what are some of the benefits which the IB school teachers can avail, and how do IB schools ensure high quality professional development?
Do you want me to start, or are you going to have somebody else?
We can start with you.
I think the IB has always taken professional development pretty seriously. I'm very pleased with the way they have moved a lot of their workshops and things into pretty good, not maybe fantastic, but pretty good online forums. A joy for me as a head of a school is that they've become much cheaper as a result, so that we've been able to make much better use of them, because we've been able to have many more members of our faculty involved. I think the IB has also really made a good attempt under very difficult circumstances to bring their assessment in line with the pandemic, and they will continue or at least indicating that they're going to continue to learn from that, and so that their assessments will be slightly more varied as a result. I think the IB has always been pretty good about its variation of assessment and its assessment for learning, but that process has been forced to speed up and become more effective. And I think the way the curriculum is developed anyway assists faculty in being in developing the skills about learning. You know, the very challenge of the IB curriculum, particularly, you know, in the PYP, the inquiry-based nature of it, I think was a challenge for PYP schools to continue inquiry at distance learning, but they managed that pretty effectively. What we have really enjoyed, for example, in the diploma and in the middle years of our program, is that we have really taken to cross-subject teaching areas, so that's been very enriching. I mean, today there was a geography with a Spanish teacher. You know, then there's a drama teacher with a physics teacher. You know, these are really engaging things, but they come back to the depth of the pedagogy, the pedagogical skills necessary to continue to engage the learner. So I think the IB training has responded well. The IB has become such a mammoth organisation that it's less agile than perhaps it used to be. But I've been impressed with what they've done, both from a technical development, from a training development, and from an assessment development.
That's great. That's great. Now I'll move to Dr. Geoffrey. What's his, sorry, Mr. Nigel, for what were his, you know, steps, or what were his point for making sure that professional development is high quality in the school during this pandemic time?
I think one of the I think one of the strengths of the IB is actually one of its weaknesses as well, but it's a weakness that over the years has become strength, is that most IB schools operate in isolation from a local authority type system. So over the years, and especially in Asia Pacific, I think possibly leads the way in this, is the development of local and informal networks. And I think they're very, very strong. Both Geoffrey and myself have a history in common in the past. We were actually both at different times in the same school in Belgium. And there are, as Geoffrey said, our budget to send people away was absolutely astronomical. It was a very, very big budget just to be able to send people away for formal IB training. And over the years, the development of these informal networks, I think, have been very, very important on giving educators the possibility to tap into expertise, that most informal networks will possibly have a workshop leader within them, will probably have examiners within them, will probably have people who've come and seen it from different school backgrounds. So you've got this wealth of informal, and also we're a community. IB educators generally want to help other IB educators. So gone are the days where you'd send people away for a 4-day workshop, they'd come back and they'd still be in isolation. You've now got this much, much richer environment of cross-pollination almost. Even down to the Facebook groups. Yeah, not always all the questions for subject-specific Facebook groups are great questions, but I'm involved with the Environmental Systems and Society's Curriculum Review, and I'm also on I'm part of the Facebook group. And there's an entire range of teachers there, from people who are senior examiners, people who are involved in the curriculum review, down to people that it's their first 3 months of teaching the program. Yeah, so you get this camaraderie, almost, for want of a better word, and I've not found it in any other curriculum, yeah, in a way that it is, because, and I think partly it's because our schools are in isolation from each other, so therefore we tend to reach out more often. And I think it's been a real strength. And again, particularly during the pandemic, the sharing, one of the great things that I've seen, which sort of links back to the last question, is that at the start of it, a lot of schools were really, really lost. And it was very, very much from that shared experience of teachers turning around and saying, well, actually, for this, I used this. I did it this way. Yeah, this resource was really great. And I think that made a big difference. And I think that's I think that's a real strength that particularly in Asia Pacific with the local networks is encouraged greatly. And I think Geoffrey's right that the IB and the regional offices have really tried to respond to the need of training by encouraging these regional networks, by encouraging different pathways. The deal signed with the University of the People, for instance, that's an amazing asset that is there. So I think a lot has been done, and the new micro learning units that the IB are test piloting in certain subjects, I think they're also going to be transformative as well. So going forward, they're important things.
Thank you, Mr. Nigel. Now I'll just move to Dr. Sarvesh. What's his point of view for this?
A couple of points have already been said by my colleagues here, but I'm just reiterating that certainly one of the biggest things that's happened is that since most of the training now is online, not only does it stretch over a longer period of time than a face-to-face 2.5 day session if you're traveling somewhere and attending, it's certainly become much cheaper. And so the learning and the training for the teachers stretching over a certain amount of time, where you can focus more on the learning rather than just trying to gather as much as you can in 2.5 days of interaction and things. So that certainly strengthened the learning aspect of it, and people are more comfortable doing it at their own pace at times. And I think the most important thing is that we have to accept the fact that the extended family of the child, of the learner, is actually becoming more aware of what exactly happens in an IB classroom, which they were not. Because most, especially in the Indian context, most of the parents had not gone through. In fact, almost all parents have not gone through the IB experience themselves. That generation hasn't yet come in to send the next generation into IB schools, or maybe just starting at the early years in the primary school. So what has really happened is that suddenly the parents have become more aware. We can't see them on the screen, but they're sitting there away from the camera, but they're certainly in the room, and the grandparents are, and the uncles and the aunts are, and the brothers and sisters are, whoever can afford to be free at that time and see what really is happening. So once they become more aware of how the IB curriculum really works and what an IB classroom is all about, I think their way of thinking has also opened out. So the fixation about certain aspects, how it has to be taught, or what subjects have to be taught, and what is the career option and things, has suddenly started opening out a lot more. And parents have started thinking about, okay, what is the relevance of this subject in a broader context, rather than just trying to get a job and mapping the first aspect of the career, which in India tends to start and end with the sciences and mathematics and things like that, and related careers. I think the relevance of where Howard Gardner was beginning to get tweaked around with IB and IB with Howard Gardner, about the multiple intelligences and recognizing that has come more to the forefront. So for example, no longer is it just written, but the verbal, and also discussion and trying to judge people on things, and virtual practicals, virtual variety of things that can be done. So kids are being given the chance to express themselves in different ways. And so their core intelligences or intelligence is coming to the forefront a lot more, rather than you had to be very good in the written skills and the memorizing skills. A huge shift has come about, and the teachers have become even more aware of it. The IB schools have always led from the front in this, but now the awareness that this works and it works well has got more consolidated. So that's one aspect. I think Daniel Goleman's aspect, which also came up at the same time in the 90s when the IB, MYP and PYP was emerging after a long run of the DP, of the emotional quotient, is something people are getting more aware of. And the parents, you see, the whole thing is, at least in India, that the determining factor of how a child succeeds is in the parents' hands rather than the schools. If they don't accept it, then you can do what you want. They will keep rejecting it. but they started accepting it. And with this emotional aspect of seeing a child emotionally strong has come in the happiness quotient. If I don't see my child happy, I'm going to face the brunt of it because I'm already living with them 24 hours, 7 days of the week now at home. So I really have to find avenues. And so things which seemed to be a waste of time has now become a process of discovery and adding on to your growth and your learning. And so this has really started making everyone, see, also don't forget that the teachers are able to zoom in. I can zoom in on all of you on the screen right now and read your faces a lot better than I can in the classroom. So for me, as a teacher, I've become more perceptive. I hope I have become more perceptive, and the teachers are being made aware of that in the training. Become more perceptive, read the body language, read the facial expression. Don't just talk because you've got to cover the syllabus. Connect in a way and sometimes deviate to hold the attention of the people. All right. Otherwise, the kids will stare at the screen for a while and then they'll have a reason to switch off. Connectivity is not good. This happened. Cameras failed me. Laptop's not working. Hundreds of ways of switching off, which you can't do in the classroom. So the teachers are learning very rapidly that it's not just the content, but the how, why, when, what, and holding a class together, and yet giving individuals a chance. All right. And finally, I think what is happening is we're making the teachers also aware of this more and more, that with the online options now, start thinking of subjects which you couldn't offer because there were no resource personnel for that in your neighborhood, or hiring them was just not feasible. Now you can actually use them for bulk of the instruction also by way of going forward with the subjects that the IB had, but people have been very reluctant to take because they couldn't find the resource people. So even things like classic with music, you know, and being able to teach it, the online instruction, it was so difficult to find a music teacher for the IB. Now you can find them. You could be sitting in Dharamshala and you may find a resource person in Mumbai who can do a lot of instruction and then come and visit you for shorter periods of time. And it's the same with many other subjects and things. And if you're a chain of schools, group schools, you can do so much more resource sharing. And schools have started doing that. So I think as one of the colleagues was saying that, you know, suddenly the unity within the IB world is coming out more and more within your own chain of schools, if you have more than one school, but certainly connecting with a lot more of other resource people from other IB schools, because it becomes so much easier to do that online, which wasn't possible 2 years ago.
That's great. I think what we can conclude from all three, whatever you have said is that one is that we have started understanding the need of SEL in this classroom too much once we have shifted to online system, and how we have to take care of the EQ and happiness quotient, as already said by Dr. Sarvesh, and multidisciplinary approach which we were just thinking. And now with this, we are focused, IB schools are focusing more on it, and projects and problem-based learning is more to it. Now I'll move to the third question today, and I'll go to Mr. Nigel now. So what are some of the tools which help the teachers in your school to deliver an engaging learning experience?
I think the tools are changing. And I'm going to be very careful in the way that I word this, is that one of the projects I'm involved in at the moment, which I think is actually going to make a leap, as not just with the project I'm involved in, but as more projects across the globe of similar sort of outputs become more available, is going to make possibly the biggest difference. Yeah, Ken Robinson once said that one of the biggest problems with education is that everybody has been taught, so everybody has an opinion on what teaching is. Yeah, but he also made another statement. He said one of the problems with teachers is that teachers are experts in their subject, so sometimes find it quite hard to understand a student that is struggling in their subject, but also quite often Teachers are theoretical experts in their subject. They're not experts in the application of their subject outside of the classroom. So one of the tools that I've been involved in over the last, actually before the pandemic, but I'm involved in a lot more now, is actually connecting schools up with industry professionals that bring in an outside viewpoint. And it goes back to what Dr. Sarvesh was saying about the ability for schools to reach out and actually tap into resources that are outside of the school. It's more than just using YouTube. It's more than just reading case studies online. It's actually going out and inviting experts in. And I think that's the biggest tool, because it's about engaging learners in relevance. And I think it might have been Geoffrey that mentioned the word relevance earlier, about the educational experience has to become more relevant. Yeah. And I think as we build that relevance, there's going to be much more cross-pollination between industry and schools. And in particular, yeah, we've got to be honest with it. If we're in private IB schools, we are in an elite position. So we have the ability to tap into some of those resources much more than a state sector school possibly would. So we need to be using those. And I think in terms of engagement, I don't think we need to engage students. I think we need to make it relevant. I think relevant is the word rather than engaging. Yeah. And one of the ways to make it relevant is to really bring out that expert reason. Yeah. Quadratic equations have a purpose. Yeah. Understanding reproduction has a purpose. We get milk because farmers understand reproduction. So bringing in that outside expertise to actually enrich and make the curriculum much more relevant. And I totally agree with Dr. Sarvesh that quite often in some parts of the world, too much focus is put on what are called the STEM subjects, but without the thought processes of the arts, which is somewhere that TOK makes a big difference in the IB that no other curriculum has. Yeah, is that really it's the arts that enliven the ability to communicate, to discuss, to analyze, to dissect, to take apart, but making that further, if that makes a little bit of sense. Yeah, and I think it's the future where we'll really make education an engaging and relevant discipline that changes from what it's been for a lot of people for a long time. That also leads to some contested areas. And again, Dr. Sarvesh highlighted it. Within that, we've got to bring our parents along. We've got to start actually educating our parents, not just keeping our parents outside the school gates, bringing them in and involving them more. And once you get parents involved, you enrich so many lessons. Yeah, most schools around the world will have parents that are involved in finance, they're involved in engineering, they're involved in medicine, they're involved in arts and culture. We need to harness those talents inside our classroom. I think those are the tools that will really make a big difference in the future.
Absolutely, Mr. Naidu. So what you have said is the parents are need not to just be, a spectator or somebody who's just facilitating their fees or finances, but also the real-time stakeholders. They must participate, or they must at least understand what is going on. And the tools have to be something which is very relevant, not just for the sake of learning the tools, but actually which gives them experience in their real life. Now I move to Dr. Geoffrey. What's his point of view for this?
Sorry. I think my point of view has a lot of common ground with both of the other speakers, but I would add to what they've said about, I think relevance is key, obviously, to engagement, and engagement is key to learning. That kids need to do that. I think that the challenge of all of this is how to continue to make it fun and to make it varied and to make it individualized. How do you individualize, differentiate a curriculum and a lesson when everybody's in their own rooms, in their own distance, all of those things. So those have been big challenges. I look at the role here of what we're facing going forward. It seems to me that education is at a point of transition, that we are at a point of transition from a technological perspective. We're at a point of transition from a relevance of assessment perspective. We're at a point of transition from a pedagogical perspective. And so how do we maintain all of those things in a relevant way for all of our students? And that's the challenge for us as educators. That's how do we stay up to date with that? And that then brings us back to how do we learn from each other? How do we become professional learners in a professional context, etc. The whole world of school-aged education has changed, not yet university-aged education, but I think that will perforce follow. And at least the evidence would suggest is that universities may become less and less relevant with online learning because adult students can learn really effectively online. I think for students at school age, particularly the primary school age, there it is clear that they learn less effectively, that there is a learning gap produced by being exclusively online. And so how do we go about filling that gap? How do we assess what that gap is? How do we go about making sure that each student is both challenged and able to be reflective about that challenge in going forward? So it is to stay up to date, to learn what to reject as well as what to accept, to be a bit experimental without experimenting too much on your students. All of these things become relevant.
Thank you, sir. I'll now move to Dr. Sarvesh. What's his, say about this? How tools are effectively used in an IB curriculum by the students? So
again, I'm not even going to venture into the list of tools that are available from the technology point of view. There's just too much of it, and it's more like eliminating rather than choosing what you want. I will try and point this out from what has already been touched on, which is that, we tend to forget that largely in the face of humanity, 66% of human beings lean towards the arts. Whether certain commercial aspects or commerce subjects added to that are part of it or not is a different story. But that's the population. And yes, as I think Nigel said, that most of the time the talk starts and ends with STEM, where there's a lot more that has evolved from STEM to STEAM to STREAM. And the reason it has done that is the recognition of the fact that children are wired differently and human beings are wired differently. One was to learn for the sake of getting a job and to get placed in a position. But those days are rapidly disappearing, just like going to offices disappearing quite rapidly, and people are working from as is where is and doing a successful job of it and things. So what is really hit, at least in the Indian scenario, is entrepreneurship. The moment entrepreneurship and youngsters started stepping into it. I've had kids in my own school who've been CEOs while they were in school, not because their dads had made them CEOs, but they started an enterprise of their own. One of them was recycling tires worth millions of rupees and recycling them and making a great job of it. Another one boy and girl in grade 11 started a partnership where they were recycling e-waste and things like that. One of the students had already got very touched by the victims of acid burn in India, which is really horribly true. And by the time she was in college, she had already launched herself into helping out acid burn victims. These are not things that are taught in school. They're not. They come from within the core and the psyche of an individual. You can do all you want in school. It doesn't make sense. TOK does, as was said. I think theory of knowledge really throws you into challenging yourself from every angle and not taking anything for granted. But even the personal projects, even the way of the PYP exhibition. I've had a student who actually made an artificial leg out of recycled material, and the knee joint was actually a cricket ball, an old cricket ball, or a new one, I can't remember. And it actually worked. He showed it that it worked. Uncomfortable, but it worked. And it it did cost more than a few hundred rupees and things. And people are coming up with all kinds of things through their entrepreneurship, creating apps, creating work aspects, which is very different from trying to get better marks in an exam. And the IB gets you to do that. IB is also the only curriculum and assessment form where you write, you are tested sometimes in reading, but certainly in listening and certainly in speaking in one subject to more than one subject and things. So it gives you the aspect to express, and we know that there are better people at speaking than they are at writing. You know, that's a known fact. I was just reading the other day that Karnataka, 50% of the kids may have lost the skill of reading over the last 2 years because it's just not happening enough. But that doesn't mean they lost the skill of being good students. They can still speak very well and write very well, even if they can't read very well. Now the thing is the assessment has to shift to recognize these shifts because people have become more visual and they perceive things much faster and they come to conclusions very quickly. And the final thing is most of our assessment is with the fear of failing. But the tools that are coming up now are going more and more towards entrepreneurship. You fail, it's not a bad thing in life. You learn from that. After all, in the age of industrial revolution, there were more failures than successes before the successes came about. And there are new entrepreneurs. They're all in school, just post-school. And they say, listen, if you make relevance to our future, great. If you don't, we will get on with our own lives anyway. And so can you make learning and schooling more exciting? Can we be happy coming to school? And that has come to stay like never before.
So true. So I would want to say here that tools are just the helping hands. The real knowledge is, as you very well have said, the TOI, what you said, TOK, sorry.
TOK.
And yes, TOK. And beautifully said. And I agree with all the points said by Mr. Nigel, Dr. Joffrey, and Dr. Sarvesh. I have the last question for today's session. It's a very, touching questions for the teachers. How are IB schools constantly working towards improving their teachers? I know IB schools are the torchbearers. The teachers are taking the steps which will make the schools more towards the experiential learning and things like that. So what are the, if I really want to know, what are the things IB schools do to constantly improve their teachers? I'll go to Dr. Geoffrey now. So
sorry. I apologize. I think that it is the purpose, is it not, of school administrators, is to improve the quality of your faculty. That the only way research would suggest that schools can influence the outcomes for students is through the quality of the teaching. And the only way you can influence the quality of the teaching is through the quality of the teachers. And so we all have to take it very seriously. Now that, of course, includes aspects of leadership and building trust, because you can't have teachers prepared to take risks or develop their own self or learn from each other without there being an atmosphere of trust. And that also impacts on the students. So you have to develop trust. You have to budget to make sure that you help improve the quality of their knowledge. So, I don't know, do teachers know and understand how to use Socratic questioning, how to use a Harkness discussion, how to use problem-based learning, how to use, all of these sort of technical aspects. And I think teaching has become more understood from a technical perspective than it ever used to be before. And that includes, of course, making sure they've got the technical educational technology skills and content as well. So we, at least at BD, we work on trying constantly to allow teachers to teach, but also get them to be reflective and critical practitioners of their own teaching, and to provide them with the skills needed to help develop themselves. And it's a never-ending story, isn't it? There is no perfect teacher. There are expert teachers, but there are no perfect teachers. And so part of being an expert teacher is to continue to learn. We recently had a wonderful session on how to include reflective questioning in your classroom. And that in itself was a wonderful session because you got teachers imagining how different techniques could work to do these sorts of things. So I think my job, primarily, the most important part of my job, I've got facilities and transport and budgets and all of those sorts of things, but the most important part of my job is to be fostering and facilitating the development and the expertise, particularly the pedagogical expertise of the teachers. And in India, anyway, I've yet to hire a teacher who didn't have a really good grasp of the content of their subject. 80, 90, 94% of my faculty have a master's degree. They all know and understand their history or their geography or their science or maths. But where we all need to develop, me as much as anybody, is how you can take that content knowledge and package it in such a way that it engages the learners in developing their own skills. So that's my tuppence halfpenny's worth for you.
Thank you, sir. So now I will move to Dr. Sarvesh. What's his points for this?
I think the biggest fear or the challenge teachers face most of the time is in the word discipline and how to interpret it. And I know that about 30 years ago, 35 years ago, teachers, they could be heard half a kilometer away shouting at the students, shut up, keep quiet, I'll sort you out, half the energy was going in that concept of discipline. But there's an inherent discipline. And if that is utilized effectively, there is no time for a group of students to deviate because they're excited, they're connected. But you can't connect them all to the same wire. They've got to be different wires connecting the different levels of interest simultaneously, or at least in a span of 40 minutes, so that you spread it around to different spans of attention. I think what has happened is that the teachers have learned now to move away from using the latest technology from projection into accessing. No longer are you projecting and talking what you're projecting, but you're allowing people to access at different paces and different ways and different resources and so on. So that's one aspect. The other one is that people have moved away from the typewriter, we moved to the laptop, and we continue to use the keyboard as a word processor. Now, those days are gone. Now you're using the gadget for a lot more than just word processing and the word document sort of thing. So that has made it a lot more exciting. I think research, the scope for research is just phenomenal at the speed of light, really. And the variety that you can bring in. So rather than giving one or two interpretations or desperately going to the library to find that one reference point which evaded you to make a breakthrough, now you have 100 reference points at the click of a button. And you can bring in variety. And more importantly, the teacher doesn't have to bring it in. You encourage the students to bring in the diversity in group work, pair work, or individual work and things. And the assessments have got a lot more personalized. The teachers are able to create assessment patterns, keeping the curriculum in mind, keeping the exams in mind, but also the more flexibility, especially the IB schools, since you asked about the IB teachers, they have more flexibility in creating question papers which are slightly different. So section A, section B, section C need not have the same identical question paper, but you can have a slightly different variant if you want, based on how you approach the subject and how you think the student will be excited. So it's not just about teaching, but assessment in itself should have a life to it. It should have an oomph to it for people to be excited about wanting to come and do assessments. And communication, I think has been said, teachers can be very knowledgeable, but if the communication skills are not effective, they're not going to make a hit in today's world and tomorrow's world. And so they're becoming more conscious of how to create that bridge between their brain, between their mouth and the ear of the listener, And that is a huge aspect that people are becoming more conscious about. At the end of the day, teachers have to be taught to believe in themselves. They should not live in this fear that I'm getting it wrong. You've got to be honest about it. The students are pretty smart. The access to knowledge is pretty good. They can access how a word is pronounced faster than you finish pronouncing that word, going through the gadgets. And you should be open enough and have a laugh at yourself. Chill out, relax a little bit, believe in yourself that everyone is a human being and we are all going to learn together rather than I have to teach and someone has to learn. And the moment that happens, learning becomes very exciting. Schools become very exciting. And the IB schools allow that. That's the beauty, that's the flexibility. But I'm not taking anything away from CBSE or the Indian curriculum. The NEP is throwing it on the face of millions of teachers and millions of students and schools. It's up to them to adapt it.
Absolutely. So I would love to hear what Mr. Nigel has to say about this.
The answer I'm going to give you is probably entirely different to the answer I would have given you 20 months ago. 20 months ago, I would have given you the answer as a head of school. But since January this year, I've been working with lots of schools on this question. How do we work towards improving our teachers? And I can talk about some things that I've seen that have been very, very rewarding, but I think also some really, not necessarily groundbreaking, but some amazing ways of actually doing that. And it's a sort of three-pronged attack. The first one comes down to one of the organizations, I work as an advisory role with an ed tech startup in Singapore. They work with schools to train mainly business management, economics, and INS teachers to deliver entrepreneurship courses. And that goes back to what Dr. Sarvesh said about the power of entrepreneurship, which I don't call entrepreneurship. I actually call it creativity.
Yeah.
Because it's a creative enterprise, yeah? And we can harness that in many ways. And some of the students in that, the same sort of thing, students who are writing 60,000 word science fiction novels that they're going to publish, students that are hand painting face masks that they're raising money for charity works, a student in the Philippines that is actually working with the Red Cross to work with groups of schools in the Philippines so that students in grade 11 become peer mentors in terms of social emotional learning inside schools. So lots of things that you can't put a grade on are actually enriching their lives, but teachers are having to get involved in actually learning new skills to support that. So that's one part of it. Yeah. The other part of it, I think, is a change that the IB has made, which I think is very, very important. It's the new standards and practices. That the standards and practices have gone from a compliance model to a reflective model. So I've authorized 3 separate schools. I've done X number of reevaluations, et cetera, and you get good at ticking those boxes. You get very, very good at finding the evidence that will fulfill the requirements. Now you've got to plan a path, and that path includes improving the teaching. And as Geoffrey said, the way that you improve education is by improving the quality of the teaching. That was the amazing thing that Finland did. Nothing more than that. All Finland really did was actually work on improving the quality of the teaching. And a myth about Finnish education is that Finland only takes the top percentile of scores from subjects in degrees. They don't. They take the top percentile of teachers that show the attributes of being a good educator. And then they train them how to train. And that leads to the third one, which I think Finland is ahead of the IB in this, but the IB is definitely ahead of some others. At the moment, I'm working with a group of teachers in the UK. And one of the things that jumps out is the lack of autonomy that those teachers have. And therefore, because the teachers have a lack of autonomy, they will not innovate.
Yes.
They only teach to the ceiling of GCSE, and they will not go beyond that for fear of, during an inspection, doing something that will get them a mark. And they have a list of things that every lesson must include. And they write lesson plans for every lesson that includes each of these items, whether it's an educationally viable or worthwhile thing to do. And I think probably more so in NYP than DP, but definitely throughout the entire continuum, teachers have autonomy. And teachers have autonomy to produce the best learning environment for the students in their care, and that should be in context. And it should be based on the students that they have, not based on just one, picking up one set of theories, one set of ideas. It should be that experimentation that Geoffrey talked about, the ability to try things out and see how they work, which from my recent experience, like I say, working with teachers in the UK, inside a British pattern education, which sadly also affects Indian education to an extent. Yeah, I can say this, I'm Welsh. Yeah, India's infected by a colonial deposition of education. Yeah, and I think the IB gives the autonomy away from that. Yeah, and I think that's probably the way that education improves the most, is by giving the teachers that autonomy to improve inside structures that are well thought out.
So true, Mr. Naidu. So here I want to conclude about this. It's just that teaching is not the last resort, and we have to understand that it's a dynamic process, and only the content knowledge will not suffice for teaching. It must, and if I really want to say, is that teaching is science plus art. It's a style. It's how you want to engage each learner. So for engaging and creating that learning environment, teachers have to go for continuous professional development trainings. Along with that, it's a cycle where you have to research, reflect, and learn. Research, reflect, and learn, right? So now, thank you so much. It was a wonderful session with you all three.
Yes.
There were lot of information, a lot of things which we loved, and I'm sure the viewers and listeners must have got some pointers for them as well. Now I'll move to Mr. Rahul for taking the session ahead.
So much, Ms. Pragati, and I must say, what a remarkable and insightful discussion it was. And thank you so very much to all the eminent speakers for joining us on this wonderful forum for this exciting deliberation. Mr. Nigel, Dr. Geoffrey, Dr. Sarvesh, and Ms. Pragati, you did a fabulous job moderating the whole session. Thank you so much once again. It was such a joy hosting you all, and I really hope you all had a wonderful time as well.
Absolutely. Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Enjoyed it thoroughly. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Now, before moving on to the last panel discussion of the day, I'd request the backend team to play a short video. Now, the topic of discussion is, how do IB's new self-paced professional learning modules offer flexibility in the learning process? Now, I'd like to welcome the eminent speakers we have in here today with us, starting from Dr. Meetha Bali. She is the head of school of GD Goenka World School. She is a seasoned educator with over 34 years of experience in the field of education. She has also worked intensively with the British Council as a British Council School Ambassador in promoting the spirit of international mindedness. She has authored English language books for Frank Educational Aids and a book of essays for Madhuban. Dr. Bali is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Jean Laurey International Grant and the Inspiring Educators Award. Thank you so much, Meetha ma'am, for joining us today. Next, we have Ms. Prabha Dikshit. She is the principal of primary school and IB PYP coordinator from Akshar Aboul International School. Being the first IB PYP school in Chennai, she led the school towards the IB PYP authorization in 2014 and the first 5 years review of the program in 2018. She has been the co-chair of the PYP South India and Sri Lanka network since 2018 and works with PYP schools in the region to support the growth in the understanding of PYP programs. Prior to becoming an educator, Ms. Prabha spent close to a decade in technology consulting at Deloitte, Tata Consultancy Services, and Mercer Consulting, at which time she taught languages and the performing arts in other settings. Thank you so much, Ms. Prabha, for joining us today. Now I'd like to also inform you that Mr. Dilip Vasu and Mr. Rajesh Vasu, they will not be able to make it to the session due to some immediate emergencies. Now, moving on to the moderator of this August panel, Ms. Tina Surveyor. She is the IBDP coordinator of Calcutta International School. She has over 20 years of experience with the international curriculum and is currently the diploma programmer coordinator at the Calcutta International School. She teaches history, global perspectives, and theory of knowledge for the IB and Cambridge curricula. Ms. Surveyor is a trainer for CAIE history and leads training sessions in various parts of the country. She's the board examiner of history and TOK for the IB and has authored textbooks for middle school published by OUP. Thank you so much, Ms. Tina, for joining us today. And thank you so much to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Over to you, Ms. Tina. You may take up the discussion board.
Thank you so much, Rahul. Welcome to the panel discussion, everybody. I'd just like to start off with a lead question about professional development in general. How important do you think professional development is, and why do you think schools need to devote attention to this area? Ms. Dikshit, if you could take that, please.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone out there. And thank you for your invite to this panel discussion this evening. Professional development, I think, is at the center of what we need to focus on as a school. And I think this is true whether it's in the context of an IB school or any other school, because we're talking about there's a lot of conversation today. Even in the previous panel, there was a talk about the NEP and how even schools with national curriculums in India are now gearing up towards looking at a more skill-based, a more holistic education. Now, and when there is so much of innovation, so much of forward thinking and movement in looking at what teaching learning needs to be like, I think it is a given that the people who are largely responsible for that teaching learning that needs to happen in a classroom certainly need to be on a mode of being learners themselves. And that becomes paramount, very, very central to what I think school leaders and school leadership is looking at and continues to need to look at. How are we going to grow the understanding of how our teachers' mindsets as well as practices in the classroom, and even practices of collaboration are going to be growing. So it's absolutely central to, I think, what we need to pay attention to at schools today.
Ms. Dr. Balli?
I'm here, yes.
Yes.
I was having, Rahul, bear with me, I was having a little bit of difficulty, I think, logging in with some technical glitch here. Because at the residence, so where I stay is a little back of beyond, so I think I was having a little problem. But I hope I'm audible and visible both now.
Yes.
All right.
So, Dr. Balli, I'd like to ask you, for school leaders, there are two aspects to look at. You need professional development in terms of upskilling the teacher to deal with the classroom. But at the same time, the teacher also needs continuous development and kind of retraining in the subject area as well. So how do you differentiate between these two kinds of development?
See, what Prabhaji said about the importance of upskilling the teachers and teacher training. I think one, it is a foregone conclusion that teachers need to be trained and retrained perpetually. The reason for this is that in IB curriculum, I think the IB curriculum is very dynamic. And it is always changing constantly to suit the requirements of the learner, because it's a very learner-centric curriculum. Therefore, it is changing constantly. Now, the fact that the curriculum is changing constantly, it is imperative that teachers also retrain themselves, right? To keep pace with the changing curriculum, the changing pedagogy. So it is important, I think, one, for teachers to look at every possibility of retraining themselves, every opportunity, not merely of retraining themselves through the IBA, because that is what is expected, but I think to be polishing their knowledge every single day, because there are resources that are available online, fantastic resources. So if one were to dedicate some amount of time during the day for research, I think that should stand the teachers in good stead. And that's what we tell our teachers when we compute or we figure out what kind of time they're dedicating to teaching learning. Some hours are put aside for research and study. So I think in IB curriculum, it is a done deal that you will dedicate some amount of time and some hours to honing your skills and learning about the changes and enriching yourself, because you're going to a classroom which is full of bright minds, bubbling with energy, and the kind of students who are probably looking for a lot of inputs. So you can never provide the kind of, what shall I say, you can never provide food for creativity unless you're really at it all the time. So I think from teachers' perspective, every day is a day you learn and deliver. That is one. And as a school leader, I feel that schools ideally should, managements ideally should dedicate large budgets for teacher training, which many managements don't. It is an unfortunate fact. Many managements do not dedicate the kind of budget which is needed for teacher training and enrichment, because everything that the teacher learns will percolate to the learner. And it's a vicious cycle. So if you want effective classroom teaching, your teacher has to be well trained. Your teacher has to be rich in knowledge. Your teacher has to have an attitude of being able to absorb whatever learning he or she can from the environment, from the professional forums, and whatever PD opportunities the management is able to provide. Because in IB, the trainings are expensive, right? So I think the managements also have the onus and responsibility of supporting the teachers. That is how I feel.
Dr. Bali, actually, you brought up a very interesting point about cost effectiveness. Schools do also have to balance their budgets, balance their books at the end of the day. If we look at the different kinds of training provided by the IB, the face-to-face trainings are the most expensive, because then you have to factor in traveling costs and hotel costs, etc. Then you have the online training, which is relatively cheaper. But the new self-paced professional development learning modules are the cheapest. This is the new offering of the IB. How effective do you think the self-paced professional modules are compared to the face-to-face or even the online training?
Is that a question directed at me or at?
Yes, Dr. Bali, you, and then Ms. Dixit.
Tina, great. All right. So the self-paced modules that have just come about, earlier we were familiar, as you very rightly said, if you wanted to go for a training, you need to factor in the costs of travel. You need to factor in the cost of the hotel stay, the accommodation, the other expenditure that you would incur while you were traveling. And sure, I think organizations have to balance their books and they have to organize their, they have to balance their finance. You have to look at what kind of money you spend on professional development. So face-to-face, ideal, Tina, is face-to-face. There are no two ways about it. I think all of us agree that there are no two ways about it. But in the absence of face-to-face, yes, online training, tutor-led training, great. The new modules that have the self-paced modules that have just been introduced. One, I think there are both pros and cons. I'd say advantages. The teachers who are working are able to register and learn at their own pace over a period of 6 months, which is a good thing. So as and when you get time, you can sit down and learn because they're self-paced. You don't have a deadline to meet. I mean, of course, the deadline is there, but the window is quite large. So you can comfortably cover whatever is there. To meet the deadline, you have enough time. So that's an advantage, a huge advantage. Two, I think most of the courses cost about 125 USD. So I would say that again is an advantage because they're very cost effective compared to even an online training. So just about anyone can afford them, right? Affordability. But the flip side is, I am told, and I was reading up in the FAQs also, if you want to use them or show them as, particularly during reviews or during authorization, if you wish to show them as PD or professional development, they're not going to be taken into consideration.
Yes. Yes.
Right? So I mean, from that perspective, if we have introduced something, however minimal it may be in terms of cost, why should it not be taken into consideration? You can't be doing this in lieu of face-to-face or online training. I mean, one completely understands because the volume of learning that may happen in these courses may not be so in-depth and so large as compared to face-to-face trainings or online trainings. However, that disadvantage is there, and I'm sure that would be one factor that might dissuade some people from taking them on.
A lot of people actually, because if you look at the fact that you have to show that all your teachers are trained when it comes to evaluation, what is the purpose then of this training? It doesn't really mean anything if the IB itself doesn't consider it. Ms. Dixit, so under what circumstances do you see, how do you think this training could be positioned and how do you think we should be using this training? Especially keeping in mind that it is not counted for authorization or evaluation.
I think earlier Dr. Bali had brought out a very important point that as school managements and school leadership, we need to look at the kind of various options that we're giving for our teachers in terms of their professional development and set aside budgets for those. Now, I think in the context of looking at it from from that perspective, the self-paced modules are fairly quite new. They've just been introduced by the IB, so there aren't actually that many options also in terms of what is being offered in the self-paced modules. But I'm sure that's a growing space. I'm sure there'll be more that are added. It could be tied back to certain HR initiatives or policies back into the school. These are modules that teachers could be offered as a part of like a rewards or recognition program. So that, it also motivates teachers to want to go back and want to invest in their own learning. Because one of the things that sometimes happens with professional development that's being done as a part of the authorization evaluation, it's very, very important from an IB perspective that we all know. But what happens is that we tend to train a large number of teachers at that point. And sometimes teachers don't look at professional development as an ongoing exercise for their own betterment and recognize the impact it's going to have both on themselves as professionals as well as on, very importantly, on their learners. So I think plugging in something like this a little bit in order to recognize, the good work that teachers are doing, that could be perhaps one option. Another option could perhaps be, depending on, of course, what the self-paced modules are offering. Some of the teachers who are more experienced in the programs and need to get a little bit more equipped with certain niche areas of learning. That's another space where these modules could be offered, because again, there's no facilitator for these modules. So somebody who's very new to the IB programs, who's only spent a couple of years in it, I think they're better off being in a virtual PD or a face-to-face PD or an in-school workshop where there's more interaction, there's more conversation, rather than being in a self-paced module.
So, Ms. Dixit, when you are allocating your PD budget and looking for professional development for your teachers, what exactly is it that you're looking for? What do you want to see in a good professional development workshop?
I think this is something that's perhaps a little different from one program to the other, as well as dependent on the experience levels of the teachers and their own, where they are in their own learning and growth journey. So I think year on year, this generally tends to differ a little bit for us. Also because we look at our own yearly goals as a school and then look at what is it that we need to be doing. But by and large, a good professional development program, I think, is one in which teachers generally like professional development programs where there are a little bit of quantifiable, measurable takeaways. I think unlike teachers who have moved into, let's say, mid-level leadership positions and beyond, who perhaps are more adept at making connections, who are willing to listen in and kind of just soak in the various things that they are hearing. I think teachers who are generally teaching in the classroom and are perhaps a large part of their role, or pretty much their entire day, is only about planning, teaching, assessing, and of course collaboratively working with colleagues in order again to plan, teach, and assess. They really need takeaways from any workshop that they go to. So whether it's an assessment workshop or it's planning or it's TOK, whatever it might be. Now, how can I go back and use this in the everyday work I do? Not so much about the mid to long-term impact, but what can I do with this tomorrow? How can I take it and run with it? Now, that is something that we certainly look for when we're looking at some of our teachers, attending some of these workshops.
What about you, Dr. Bali? What is it that you look for?
Normally, when as I said, when we ask our teachers to go for their trainings, you always take on people who are potentially good IB educators. They may not necessarily be trained. Sometimes, in all schools, I think the teacher attrition rates are fairly high. It's a general mandate. So when you come across somebody who's, when there is a place that's created because somebody is left, and we find somebody who's potentially a good IB teacher after having spoken to them, first thing first, I think one wants to put them through a training so that they get used to the IB jargon. Because anybody who's thrown into the sea, sometimes it can be the sea of IB, if I may say so. It can be very overwhelming for them the first few days. So of course we have a slight, period of induction and acclimatization for these teachers through in-house programs. I give a lot of importance to in-house programs. What we do is through the year, we ask every teacher to make presentations about different aspects of IB pedagogy, whether it is in the PYP or it's in the IBDP. All teachers are expected to make presentations by turns. So I think by virtue of that, because these presentations that are related to the IB pedagogy are happening so frequently through the year, a lot of information is seeping in. And so that is one. And two, however, we expect every teacher to go for formal trainings, because we know that it's going to hurt when we have a review. It is really going to hurt and should not end as an MTBA. And so everybody has to go through the trainings. So I insist on formal trainings, and my first a suggestion to most people is if a face-to-face training is not available, go for an online training. Attend every possible SIPSA related to your subject. Wherever a possibility is of attending SIPSA, please ensure that you attend. We ensure that they attend SIPSA sessions. So first thing first, trainings I feel are imperative. And if there's a face-to-face training that's available, great, go for it. But with this new self-paced thing, Ms. Dixit very rightly said that they could be used to bolster and support the regular formal trainings, and they could be used to plug in some, wherever there may be gaps, or could be used as an incentive to encourage people to enhance their learning. From the side of the management, it could be used as an incentive. I think that's a great thought. That's a great thought, and maybe something to mull over. But I also feel that, the self-paced modules definitely have one advantage. I'm told they're hyper-focused. When I say they're hyper-focused, they focus on areas which are not normally taken into account when, or don't cover topics. The topics covered are the ones that don't normally feature in formal IB trainings. So if they're hyper-focused, then they definitely add some value. They definitely add some value. That's one, and also because they're self-paced and you can revisit them for almost 6 months after you have completed, or when you've purchased a course, you can revisit the course for 6 months, and 6 months is a long time. I think that advantage also is there. So absolutely no harm, but as I said, of course, it's not going to, I do hope the policy changes. There'll be many more takers for these self-paced courses. Maybe there could be a point system. You need not give them the kind of importance you give to a formal face-to-face training or an online training or a tutor-led training, but some credibility or some significance can be given to these self-paced courses as well. When you're taking into consideration the professional development that has happened in a school, particularly during a review or during an authorization.
You brought up an interesting point, Dr. Bali, about tutor-led courses. These self-paced courses are actually tutorless. There's no facilitator.
Yes, yes.
So how do you think, and I address this to both of you, how do you think that would impact the entire process of doing this kind of a workshop, the fact that there is no facilitator? Ms. Dixit first, and then Dr. Bali.
So I think, like it said earlier, one of the reasons why I feel a self-paced is probably something that's better suited for teachers who've been in the IB programs for a little while or have been practitioners for a fair number of years. It's better suited for them because one, like what Dr. Bali said, they're hyper-focused. So it doesn't really give you a breadth of understanding of what happens. It's asking you to get into the depth of particular areas. And for one to be able to engage with that kind of depth, I think you should have been teaching in the program at least for a fair number of years. And we're also huge advocates of doing a lot of in-school professional development initially for our teachers, just like, again, what Dr. Bali said, because I think getting teachers onboarded into the expectations of the framework of the program in itself takes a little while. So I think one of the impact of this taking a self-paced module is it's really only for somebody who's been probably in the program for a little while. The fact that, and I think that way they are also perhaps more used to something which is not always facilitator-led, and I don't need the validation from a facilitator. I'm able to make those connections for myself, or I'm able to, perhaps discuss it within professional learning communities that I'm a part of when I take this PD. The other side of this, I think, is that one of the great things I think about a self-paced module is I think it's a wonderful tool to build teacher agency. So, it's if we are able to put it across in a manner where it's it's the initiative and the agency from the teacher which is driving the whole thing. I think this can be used as a tool to be able to further that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Dixit. Dr. Bali, what's your take on this?
I quite agree with Prabha when she says that this is the way we keep talking about student agency all the time. I mean, that is so deeply ingrained in the culture of IB. If we are talking so frequently about student agency, then why not teacher agency? And particularly those who have been in the system for a fairly long length of time, for some length of time. Now maybe looking for a little more learning, a little more excitement. So and of course, they have their schedules, which are very tight. So the format is self-paced. Even though there is no facilitator, these teachers have already been teaching and they're used to research. See, I think the most important thing is that we keep talking about research in IB, which is the heart and soul of the IB curriculum. So if you're talking about a self-paced module, I would say research is at the heart of that as well. So allow the teachers then to research, even though there's no tutor. Allow the teachers, I'm sure they don't need, at that stage, they'd only take on these courses because they probably feel they don't need that kind of hand-holding, right? So if the research is at the heart of the IB curriculum, then definitely the teachers are also expected to research and ferret out information which is relevant and dedicate some amount of time to finding facts and completing their learning engagements. So I really feel that perhaps it would be very useful for teachers who have already been in the system for some years and are now ready to maybe, as I said, learn a little more, learn at their own leisurely pace, learn in the comfort of their homes, right? Do not want to travel, learn in the comfort of their homes, and also learn without this learning impacting or taking away a slice of their time from their school, right? So that way, I guess these self-paced modules could be very, very beneficial. And of course, you retain these resources and you go back to them as points of reference time and again. I mean, there are a lot of detractors who believe that distance learning programs or such programs may not be very useful. But I, for one, really feel that if you're careful about retaining the resources, they can be your go-to. And you can always relearn and use them as points of reference. So they are definitely useful. I mean, they've got their pluses.
Again, another question for both of you. So what is it that you are doing apart from, IB mandated workshops? There's a lot of PD out there, and especially I think the one thing that all of us have benefited from during the pandemic is the amount of webinars that we've had access to, which we would not have had access to so easily before the pandemic. So apart from the IB mandated workshops, what steps are you taking? How do you encourage your teachers to sort of, develop their performance, enhance their delivery, and to just ensure a better quality of teaching in the classroom?
Prabha, would you like to answer that first?
Okay, sure. So I think, Tina, you brought a very important point here. I think with the COVID having hit, one of the upsides to it has been, webinars like these, and there's just so much learning out there. And with most webinars, there are recorded versions left. So even if we've not been able to participate in something because it's at a crazy hour in India or something, you can always go back, catch a recording. And I think that way, it's really opened up the ability to go out there and learn like never before. But I think as a school, a couple of other things that we do is with the IB, yes, there's one which is these workshops and the mandated workshops, but they've now also put out these nano PDs as a part of their website, and that's actually on the public website itself. It's accessible to, in fact, anybody. You don't even have to be an IB school. You can go take those nano PDs. And of course, if you're an IB school, you also are a part of the My IB, and there's program communities. And there are different groups within program communities as well. There's a group for additional language teachers. There's in the DP, you've got the group 3 teachers and so on and so forth. So I think it's a great space to also be able to share what you are doing and also hear and learn out from others. So I think encouraging teachers to go take these is something that we do, and I think a lot of schools take advantage of those resources that the IB itself has put out. As a school, other than that, like what Dr. Bali said, we also have a strong induction program. So we want to kind of handhold new teachers who come in, allow them to settle in. There's mentoring that happens. So teachers who've been in the program for a little while are able to handhold and support newer teachers in what they need to do. So there's, peer observation, giving feedback. All of that is a part of that mentoring program. And on a weekly basis, we also set aside a little time within the teacher's schedule when all teachers of a particular program come together and are engaged in a professional development session. And sometimes that is self-driven, other times it's facilitator-led, just like the options that the IB has. We've got our own little options as well within the school. Yeah, so those are some of the things that we do as a school.
Dr. Bali?
Yeah, very much like what Prabha said, and I spoke about, we have very strong in-house professional development programs. Now, our professional development programs are scheduled at least twice a year, very strong. There are days that are dedicated, about 4 days are dedicated to professional development programs. Because we don't really run the IB program, we also run the Cambridge-driven programs, the ASNA levels, the IGCSE and CLS. So different sets of people are training for these 4 days with different heads and different facilitators. Now, the people who are facilitating these trainings are drawn out from within our own cohort of teachers normally, because as I said, I really feel strongly that when somebody is made a presenter or a workshop leader, so to say, on home ground, there are 2 advantages to it. One, if you're doing it on home ground, you're not so jittery because you have a familiar crowd around you. So a lot of teachers feel very encouraged and they're very enthusiastic because they want to do it well. Because I keep telling them this is a great learning opportunity. Okay, this is a great learning opportunity because here you have a group of people who are going to be completely non-judgmental. So go ahead and present. So one, we make these teachers presenters and workshop leaders. So those in-house, and because they are made for leaders, workshop leaders, there is a lot of research they conduct to prepare their presentations. And believe you me, I mean, sometimes I am really surprised at the kind of workshops they're able to lead. They're almost professional. They're good. They're very good. And of course, the teachers, when they're interacting with the person who's the coordinator of the workshop, the teachers also are uninhibited in asking questions because you're interacting with somebody you are familiar with. Therefore, I think there is this general atmosphere of comfort and bonhomie that is there because you're interacting with familiar people and you're on familiar ground. So that is very, very useful. And 2, I would say it helps to boost the confidence of the learners and the coordinator of the workshop. And a great deal of learning happens. 2, I always insist on reflection. When we are through with our workshops, I always tell my coordinators, my heads of program, that ask your teachers to sit down and reflect and give you a clear and candid feedback on how much have they learned, how much more could they have learned, what could have been added to this workshop to make it more effective. How else could the quality of this professional development module be enhanced? So be prepared for, a little, snowballing. Be prepared that you may get a little bit of a battering. So ask them to reflect. So end your workshop with the reflection and a feedback form that's filled out by teachers. And I do the same. Whenever I take workshops with my teachers, I do the same, because it's very important for us also to know as leaders, because there's always scope for improvement. There's huge scope for improvement for everyone. So it's about people learning from one another.
I think that point of reflection is a very interesting point. It's a very useful point. And also tied to that, as school leaders, you can send your teachers to workshops, but how do you ensure that they actually implement what they are learning? Do you have any sort of mechanism to track whether they are actually implementing what has been delivered at the workshop? Ms. Dixit?
I think one of the things that happens is, I'm saying at a systemic level, it's tied back into an appraisal process. Not so much about a checkbox of what are the 5 things that you tried, but really talking and understanding where the teacher's teaching practice was and where has it moved and what are the reasons for that having been positively impacted. So I think there is a sense of how much of this is actually getting translated into a classroom. So I am thinking that's largely how we perhaps get to understand. And I think also when we start looking at it in terms of student learning and student outcomes, and when we look at where were the students to where they have moved now, and I don't mean that from just purely a grade or a score or a grade band level in a DP perspective, but really in terms of looking at even to what extent are students able to handle their research projects, how are they able to articulate their thinking, where have they moved in terms of the kind of connections that they are making, in the PYP, if it's in the PYP, it's transdisciplinary. In the DP, if it's about making connections back to CAS and TOK, and how is that getting reflected? So when we look at where is it that students have moved back, and go back and try and trace that source to how the teaching has impacted students, I think there's definitely a good understanding of how professional development is actually impacting learners ultimately in the classroom.
Dr. Bali, what about you?
Tina, with me, what we normally do is every time we send out a teacher for training, we ask them to come back and share the resources. So one, we always ask them to share the resources that they have with them, whatever they have procured during the training, to share the resources, because we have a corpus of resources that the other teachers can delve into. That is one. Two, I always tell my teacher who's gone for a training to come back, and we ask the chair of department to organize a meeting with the teacher and with the other members of the department, and ask this teacher to make a presentation about what she or he has learned. So you can't, for us, you can't learn in isolation. What you learn has to be disseminated and shared with the others. However, to what degree has it percolated to students? That is very important. As Prabha said, that would reflect in the performance of the students, right? But as a school and as a leader, I really feel that there is absolutely, I have these sessions called Meet the Principal. Now, when I have these sessions, the teachers are very much a part of this session, you know. And these happen twice or thrice a year. So generally during the time which is dedicated to an assembly, I pull out one class and say, well, we are going to have Meet the Principal session where you can speak about anything that you wish to speak about. But I always have some trigger questions. I always have some trigger questions which through which I'm able to elicit responses. And those responses very clearly reflect what kind of learning is happening in the classroom. And I really feel that children, of course, are generally, wary of giving a very adverse feedback, but you can always read between the lines if the teaching learning is not very effective in the classroom. As a leader, you can always read between the lines. I think all leaders are very sharp. They're perceptive, so they're able to read between the lines. We never encourage children to speak, in a derogatory manner about anybody. But however, these Meet the Principal sessions are very useful. You know, I found that there's so much I could gauge of the needs of the students because as administrators and heads of schools, even though I believe that every head of school should be a classroom teacher, I myself teach theory of knowledge to a section. But it's very important to meet children and to listen to them because they are the most important stakeholders. I always tell my teachers, they're the most important stakeholders. We are here because they're here. So let's listen to them. So together we listen to children, and I think we are able to take it forward from there. So teachers also know, even though somebody claims that they have gone through multiple trainings, whether or not those trainings have benefited, because the whole purpose of the training is that it must benefit the learner. If the learner has not benefited, then what's the point of training? It's not for one's own personal benefit. Of course, it's for one's professional growth. That goes without saying. It must percolate to children.
So when you are deciding on the, your PD for the year, what is it that you look at? Do you look at what the students want? Do you look at what your perception is of what the teacher needs? Or do you look at what is mandated, what is required by the IB? Or, that there are so many requirements that we have to fulfill. For example, a teacher has to have, say, a Cat 2 or a Cat 3 workshop. But maybe what that teacher really needs is a session on classroom management or something, a workshop there. So how do you sort of navigate this, and how do you decide where to send a teacher?
Generally, Tina, when a teacher is appointed, say a month hence or something, I make it a point to have these personal meetings with these teachers. So I sit them down and I ask them multiple questions, very, very straight questions like, have you adjusted? Have you got the resources that you need from your chair of department? Are you getting the kind of support you need from the head of program? This is a done deal. So, and please do speak up. The whole purpose of asking these questions is that we want to help you. So somewhere something should not be left out because somebody's busy doing or very preoccupied. Not that they don't want to help you, but maybe they're preoccupied and somebody needs to tell them. So HR and I sit down and have a little conversation. I have these conversations with my teachers. So I know immediately that the teacher needs a certain kind of training, like you said, something on classroom management, right? It could be that. Say, for example, PYP teacher should be put through making the PYP happen. So an in-house workshop. And you can gauge immediately that there is a dire need because the teacher is not getting her teeth into the pedagogy. So you just have to find your feet first. So first thing first, if there is need for that, we ensure that within in-house resources are mobilized and teachers given the help that he or she needs. Second, we always look at, what kind of prior trainings has the teacher done? And is there need to move to the next level now? So then we recommend that the teacher register for professional development programs, the face-to-face or an online training, whatever it be. Because those, in any case, at the end of the day, are mandated by, not really mandated by IB, but I also feel that if you really want to be an IB educator, you will have to go through this. It's for your own personal, there's so much learning that happens. So you will have to go through this. In the absence of face-to-face training or even an online training, we always put a mentor who's gone through a similar training to spend a weekend with this teacher, maybe a Saturday, spend some hours with this teacher, share resources, ask the teacher to study by herself or himself, so that teacher's in a better state of preparedness. And as I said, through Meet the Principal sessions, I'm always able to figure out the gaps.
Right. What about you, Ms. Dikshit? How do you all do it at your school?
I think a lot of things what Dr. Bali said is pretty much what we do as well. It's conversations with teachers. Sometimes just sitting down with teachers and asking them, especially if they have been teaching for 1 or 2 years already, right? I mean, absolutely new teachers will not be able to. But for absolutely new teachers, in any case, they need to go through the induction and just get used to the rigmarole of the whole thing first. But for teachers who've been teaching for a few years, I think many a times just sitting down with them and having an open conversation, and I think also encouraging the team leads that they work with, that they need to be doing more of these open conversations with the teachers so that they are able to bring back that information into the organization to say, this is what we are seeing teachers require. And I think sometimes as a school community, when our own understanding of the program grows, we also start getting a sense of what our focus area is. Because I mean, I remember back in the day, 10 years ago, when we first started the PYP in Chennai, it was nascent. There was no other school for us also here to look up to. And back then we used to just bang our heads with nothing but an inquiry cycle of, Kath Murdoch and Kathy Short and all that. Today, right, that's become a practice in the culture of the school. We don't feel the need for something like that anymore, right? So the focus is shifted into other areas. We look more at agency now. So, I mean, a couple of other areas. So it's, I think it, as a school grows in its own maturity level as well, as a school leadership, when we listen to the voice of what our teachers are saying, what even our mid-level leaders are saying, I think it gives a pretty good sense of what is the kind of training that we need to look for when we plan out a training calendar for the year.
Okay, thank you both so much. I think this has been a wonderfully informative session, and I personally have learned so much. So thanks both of you. And over to you, Rahul.
Thank you so much, Tina ma'am. And really, that was such a wonderful deliberation and quite an insightful one, I must say. And I'd like to thank all the eminent speakers for taking some time out of their busy schedule to be here with us on this wonderful forum. And it was such a delight hosting you all. And Prabha ma'am, Neeta ma'am, we have been hosting you for so many in so many events, and you have been a wonderful panelist as well as a moderator as well. And Tina ma'am, thank you so much for moderating this session so well. And once again, it was an honor and pleasure hosting you all, and I really hope you two all had a wonderful time as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much once again. Have a great evening ahead.
Bye-bye.
Now, finally, I'd like to thank our wonderful audience. This event would have been incomplete without their support. There's a feedback link in the chat box. Please do fill it up to get the e-certificates, and please do follow our social media handles to get all the updates on our upcoming events.